Welcome, everyone. For those joining this session for the first time, what I usually do is from time to time, I record sessions which capture some new features or new improvements that we make in Mattermost and just spread this information across the whole CS organization for you guys to be able to debug issues better that come from customers. So generally, like these range from like, okay, how do we debug certain performance problems, or what are some of the logging improvements that we have done for some of the common issues that we have seen in the past, so that you guys are more aware of if such an issue happens in the future, how do we debug that, or what are the things that we can ask the customer to get proper info. The first thing that we have is we have new Grafana metrics for database connection pool. So the origin for this comes from a request that Colton made some time back, that like, how do we ask the customer to set, or like what is the ideal value for max open cons, max idle cons, and other things, right? So the thing is that we don't actually know until we have the metrics, and now we have the metrics. So this is an example of how it used to look for community after we deployed that. So let's take a look at couple of the metrics that we have here. So this green line is your number of connections that are in total open open to the database, right? And the yellow line is the number of connections that are actually in use, right? Which means that this gap is the number of connections in buffer, right? So I hope that part is clear. And we have a couple more metrics here. So this orange line is the connections, number of connections closed due to the max idle cons value. And this blue line is the number of connections that had to wait for a connection to be created. So let me explain. This part is clear, open cons and in-use cons. And now what we have other configuration parameters like max idle cons, max idle con time, and max idle lifetime as well. But max idle lifetime is not super important. So let's take a look at what's happening here. What we are seeing is that there are a significant number of connections, which is actually like comparable to the number of open connections being closed due to the max idle cons, right? Which means that Mattermost is opening more connections than the max idle cons that's being set, right? And so here is the problem. So ideally, we would want this line, the orange line, max idle closed, to be very low, right? Because we do not want Mattermost to close the connection just for the application to again open the connection next time a request comes, right? So here is the first problem that we are noticing. And then this one here is the blue line is the wait count, which means that if a request comes that cannot be served from the connection pool, it needs to wait until a new connection is actually created, and then it can be served. Then the SQL query can be served in that connection. So it is just an indicator for the fact that, like, if you see spikes in wait count, that means like the connection was not served from the pool and a new connection had to be created. So during this time, you can see that like this gap. So this gap means the number of connections that are there in the buffer, right? So here you can see like there is no gap. So the open connections also spike up and in-use connections also spike up, right? Which means that like, okay, something happened. Maybe there was a spike in requests or something. But in general, we are seeing that like the blue lines are fairly low. Like there is not much here. And this is like, I think, in a 4-hour period. But the major problem that we are seeing here is that the orange line is quite high, right? So which means that the max idle cons value is not the ideal. So just to recap here, we have 4 settings: max open cons, max idle cons, max con lifetime, max con idle time. The objective is to tune to a point where wait count, all of this are close to 0, right? Max lifetime closed is a metric, but usually not the main problem. So now let's take a look at what happens when we bump up the max idle cons. So this is taken from community where max open cons is 15, max idle cons was 2. Now, this morning, we did the change where we bumped up max idle cons to 8, right? So which means we are allowing more number of connections to remain in the idle state. Now we can see the change here. So here is when the change happened. So see this orange line that immediately drops, and the green line, it gets set to higher, which means that so we are allowing more open connections to be created, right? So open connections, the value was never changed. It was always 15. But due to the fact that max cons was so low, we were not even able to create the connections. So now this is
Max,
like
sorry, Agniva, max idle cons was so low.
Yes, sorry, what did I say? Max open cons.
You just said max cons. I just want to make sure.
Max idle cons. Yes. Yeah. So so now we can see that like it's at a pretty decent stage. There is a reasonable connections in the buffer. So the gap between the green line and the yellow line is the number of connections in the buffer, and there are no like big spikes in anything else. So like the orange line, the blue line is also low. So we know that like okay, this is at a good state. So right now, the SREs are porting this dashboard to our cloud production, and we'll take a look at and see what's happening over there. I have not yet added this panel to our performance monitoring V2 dashboard, and that's on my list. That's something that I'm going to add. But this is there, I think, in 7.7 onwards. I'm not sure. We can check. But like if anytime a customer comes and asks that, hey, like if do we want to tune the database connections or something is some maybe like frequently Mattermost is continuously opening and closing connections. This is something to look at.
So when you said it's coming in 7 something, that's the Prometheus metrics that would back a dashboard like this. Is that what you're talking about?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So any questions on this one before I move?
One quick question from me. So I see max idle closed. What metric is just the max connections? Do we have anything here that records that?
Yeah, there is. I've just not added this part in the panel. There is. Like you can see, like it's not here, but the Prometheus metric is there. So if you want, you can just add this to the panel. And so max cons is just the max cons setting in the configuration. So like it might not. I mean, it'll just be a constant, right? So I thought it might not make sense to add that because since it's just the configuration value. But if you want, you can add that. It's there in Prometheus.
Cool, perfect. I'm just thinking about dummy proofing this for customers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it might also make sense like to see in a single panel that like, okay, this is the maximum number of connections you can open to, and like, okay, this is the current maximum connections. This is the current number of connections open. So yeah. Any other questions? Okay.
So dovetailing off of what Colton says about user population, what's the percentage of customers who don't have Grafana running? Is it a lot of them? And is there a way to get this data, not as pretty, but get this data spooled out somewhere else maybe that's part of the logging conversation we'll have. But I'm thinking about those people who don't, we always had come, oh, well, you have to set up Grafana, and then weeks come by and whatnot. Is there alternate ways to get similar information, not quite as high fidelity?
Not really like this. This is like very much suited to only Grafana monitoring. I mean, I have been pushing for more and more customers, excuse me, to enable Prometheus and Grafana, because like that is the only way for us to be able to analyze and understand what's happening deep inside Mattermost. Like there are so many metrics that we can look at. And I don't have the exact numbers on how many customers are using Prometheus and Grafana. So I think Stu and Colton will be able to tell you more. But like it's a bit hard to post this in the logs, because like you actually need to see this in a panel for you to understand, like, okay, here we can see that the orange line is close to the green line, and that's how we made a conclusion that like, okay, the max idle cons setting is very high, very low, and we need to bump it up. And so I think like it would be like very hard to do something like this by like you'll anyways need to parse the logs and like do something of that sort. So yeah, I think I'd recommend using Prometheus and Grafana to be the way to debug this. Okay.
Okay. That makes sense. Good.
Yeah. Moving on. So this was another request for, I think Tesla requested one such feature where they wanted authentication to be done via certificate rather than just username password. So yeah, this was done recently. So now in the system console, you will see 3 new fields, and you can specify your certificates and key paths and all of that. So the key thing to note here is that like you can actually use this in conjunction with the server username password. So there are actually now 3 ways of doing this. So first is like the original way of using username password. Second is you can use username password for authorization, and you can use the client cert for authentication. And then the third way is you can entirely use just the client cert for both authorization and authentication. And the best part is that Elasticsearch figures out all of this automatically. So from our side, if you just keep these fields empty and set username password, we'll just send everything. And like if you set all of these 3 fields and username password, we'll also send everything. And all of the configuration is done on the Elasticsearch side. So I'm forgetting, like there is a configuration setting which indicates whether you want to prioritize the certificates or not. I'm forgetting exactly, but yeah, the thing is that basically from Mattermost side, we'll send everything to Elasticsearch, and Elasticsearch automatically figures out what to use to do what, depending on how the configuration is. And that's pretty much about this one. And okay, so some improvements to bulk export that we made were, so basically like you create the export, and then you get the job ID, and then query the status of the job ID just to see where the export job is, like how far the export job has gone. Now, the thing is that previously, like there wasn't a like a progress indicator of like, okay, 0%, 2%, 10% for you to understand like, okay, how much exactly has happened. And that is still not done, because that is quite hard, because like, okay, if we are not exactly like for Elasticsearch indexing, like, okay, we are just going through the posts, right? So it's just like a single thing. But for here, like, okay, there are multiple things that we need to export. So like, it's not that straightforward. So we don't have the progress indicator yet. But what we have is like, we have like a metadata field that will get populated. And every time like new things get exported, this will get updated. So at least like, okay, you can see like some movement here. So like, yeah, initially this will be set to pending, and then in progress you can see that like, okay, some things got exported, and finally when we success, then yeah, more things got added here. So just like a usability improvement from the user side, for them to actually know more whether like, okay, it's is it truly stuck, or it's actually moving, or what's happening there. And there's one more thing that we added is that like, okay, in your logs, so this is just from MMCTL, right? Which means that this is in the database. But in the logs also, we would print these messages of like, okay, we are exporting teams, channels, users. Now, one extra thing is that we are now usually what would happen is like the posts is where things would start to get hazy, right? Because like all of these are reasonably happen fast, but posts will take the maximum amount of time. So now we have an extra log line that will print every 5 minutes. So yeah, in 5 minutes, whatever number of posts were processed, it'll just print that. And this is in the debug level, by the way. So yeah, that is yet another indicator for us to understand whether the job is stuck or whether it's processing or not. Any questions here before we move on? No. Okay.
I guess I have a quick one that's maybe better for the PMs. Is there a and I've seen it from user voice or whatever it is, product board as well. The ability to be more surgical in your export. It'll be bulk, but like just a team or just a channel.
Yeah,
or just
I
a
think,
user.
Right. I think Sven posted this some time back. The thing is that like it like all of these are interconnected, right? So it's a bit difficult to just export something. So what we would want to have is like, whatever you export, you should be able to import that, right? So now let's say that, oh, okay, you export just a single user, but then like the posts made by the user or which channels the user is part of is no longer there, right? So when you import that, none of the other relations are maintained. So
Right.
then what happens if you export just the channels, right? So that linking is sort of lost. So it's a bit tricky, and yeah.
I'm thinking of a one-way, maybe not a bulk export with the thought of importing it. I'm talking a bulk export with the thought of archiving whatever user X said because they're an important user, or we need to really find out what that person was doing because they're about to go up on charges and get an orange suit. So
I think
maybe that's better for compliance. I don't know.
Yeah, I think this is going more in direction towards audit logging. And yeah, like a given, like if we want to trace an activity of a specific user, maybe we could do something like, okay, just pass the user ID and then just go through the audit logs and look at what all activities the user has done. So
I'd love to have audit logging for certain individuals.
So there is good news and bad news. The good news is we had planned all of that, because like we got a request from the security team that we want audit logging to be done not only for not only for requests that update the database, but we want audit logging for every API request, right? So that was in our OKR, but now our lot of members of our team is no longer there. So I don't think we'll be able to get to that. So yeah.
So is there going to be a before and after of what the OKRs were and what they're going to be? I know, because I'd love to see what's falling on the cutting room floor, because that to me is very important.
Right. Yeah, I still,
everything as we know, but
yeah, I still don't know the answer to that. I guess today or tomorrow we'll have more clarity. But yeah,
that's a different topic, and
that's.
I don't want to take.
Yeah, but anyways, so originally all of this was planned. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay. So compliance export. Yeah. This actually originated from having to debug the ServiceNow issues with compliance export. And so yeah, we went ahead and made a bunch of improvements. So yeah, first of all, like the job progress indicator was completely broken. Like you would have percentage completions of like 500%, 600%, which were completely wrong. So that was the first thing we fixed. And then the biggest improvement is the job is now resumable, right? So this was, we did this first in Elasticsearch indexing. Now we did this in compliance export. So the problem is in our cloud production environment, like Kubernetes is like completely liable to randomly shut down pods, and then it'll bring up again depending on its state. So like controlling which pod is up and running is totally out of our control and is not even recommended. So which means that our application needs to be resistant to random shutdowns, right? So we did this. By the way, there was also an item to make bulk export resumable as well. Again, that is, who knows when we'll get to that. So yeah, like we've had a bunch of very, very big improvements to bulk export, like making the bulk export resumable, allowing incremental bulk export, right? So for example, for large customers, sorry, this is a bit of a digression, but I think it's important. So for large customers, like bulk export might take days to happen, right? And like suddenly at the end of the day, like after 99% of completion, if suddenly an error happens, then like all of the progress is gone, right? So what we wanted to have is like incremental checkpoints, so that whenever if a crash happens much later during the export phase, whatever the last saved checkpoint, like that is still like valid data, and we can give that to the customer, and that can be imported, and like then we'll retry from the last saved checkpoint, export that part, and then import that part. So yeah, like a couple of very good improvements we had on the roadmap. Let's see. Okay. Job progress indicator, job is now resumable. There is still one small bug here, which does not make it fully resumable, but it's just a matter of fixing that bug. And also, the SQL query, which actually takes the posts, is quite heavy and can take like 10-12 seconds to execute depending on the customer. So what will happen is, let's say that the SQL query is executing and suddenly you want to restart the server will actually get stuck until the query finishes executing, and then it will shut down, right? But if the query is taking too long, then Kubernetes will force shutdown, right? Because like there is a timeout of graceful shutdown beyond which it will just forcefully kill the pod, which means that like, okay, who knows what other server state might not be shut down properly, which might lead to other issues. So what we did was like, okay, now if a shutdown signal is sent, the SQL query itself gets cancelled and just like immediately quits. And yeah, that was it. And yeah, I'll open the floor to any questions if you have like any general questions, just a normal AMA session. Nothing. Okay.
I do think, just to sort of piggyback on what I think Mark was talking about, I do think the ability at some point to sort of granularly pick whose data gets exported with regards to compliance.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know how often, I mean, it's probably not very often that customers ask for this, but I know, with some larger financial companies, there's lots of like regulatory requirements around, who can, like whose messages need to be monitored and whose don't.
Yeah. To add to that, it's not like a huge amount of people or companies asking for this, but this request does come up here and there. Like it's not a rare thing, but it's also not like the top ask. But that functionality definitely would have some takers in our customer base. I think it's verging into the e-discovery legal hold realm as well. They would like to be able to separate the handling of their regulated users from their non-regulated users, where I believe a regulated user is like someone who's talking and touching financial kind of data.
Yeah, at the moment they segregate it out on channel, so they've got some channels that they don't consider regulated and others that do when it comes to compliance. So they do it on a channel basis rather than individual user basis, but they would find this useful, I'm sure.
Yeah, doing this on a channel basis is still doable. Yeah, that is still doable. But yeah, for specific users,
we had some users that were allowed to make trades on the stock market, for example. And so their conversations had to be heavily monitored for like insider trading. But the companies that monitor that stuff, it's very expensive because like you send their messages off and they run it through some algorithm or something that looks for, I guess it looks, I don't know what it does anyway. So we actually had to do the export locally and then just sort of manually hack through it with a list of anyway. But yeah,
if you're talking about just monitoring specific users, I think audit logging is a much better way to do that. Because like if you have, like you can set dedicated filters on that, like, okay, how much you want to log, what events you want to log, and then just filter on the user ID. But I think like, yeah, compliance export may be a different thing.
As another data point, I just got that question. They were really interested in being able to silo people for inspection. Now, were there any logging improvements? I mean, I know you said that some of them were proposed, but did any of them make it?
Which in which context you're
talking about? Like audit logging. I like it. It's a good start, but I feel like there's a lot more that needs to be done.
Yeah. They're not done. So yeah.
Agniva, we lost some of your audio a bit there. I don't know. You dropped in volume a bit for me.
Oh, right now?
Or maybe I've just been shouting and everyone else is shouting. I don't know.
Wait.
No. Agniva is definitely a little lower in volume than everybody else.
Agniva, do you mind shouting, please, really loudly?
Get angry if necessary.
Oh, okay. Just a second. Is it better now?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Okay. Yeah. What else? Anything else that's on your mind?
I don't have a lot because like I'm just happy
about that first section. That was like super helpful. Because a lot of the times when you get the Grafana logs, I'm like looking at things and I'm like, okay, is this a good baseline or is this too much? I mean, you can see the spikes, and like if you look at some of the values, especially for like channel switching and post submission duration, it's very obvious. Like if it takes longer than a second, then it's probably too much. But especially for these like DB connections and connections in general, it's super helpful. So thank you for that.
Cool.
Yeah, Agniva, thank you. You're like my oracle of IT. I can sit in a call and listen to you talk about probably anything related to Mattermost and IT. So please, we will take it. I think judging by the attendance, people are hungry for this from you. Looking forward to the next one. If you have the capacity and the time, we'll take what we can get. I think it really helps us. One area that I'm always seeking out more information on is more of a first principles, background on first principles at the database tier, like and how to think about things and how they work. I think I'm always about first principles because it helps me try to synthesize answers in places where I don't have a pattern to follow already. So if there's things that you see in the lines of questioning or the gaps in the understanding that we have when we're doing our own analysis of what we see on the database or performance or slow queries or whatever it may be. If you think there's a pattern there that you could kind of train us up on, I think that would be something I'd be interested in. But yeah, thank you so much for the time.
Not really. I think overall the general knowledge is already there that okay, if you see some SQL queries behaving slowly, ask the customer to get the slow query logs and then send it over to us, and also look at the Grafana graphs. I think
just keep an eye out for it, not for right now, but just in the background. That's an area that I'm curious about too. So.
Yeah, I think talking about database internal stuff, sometimes even we don't know, for example, this current DR Technologies thing. So I took a look at the queries, and the improvement which they suggested works kind of okay in MySQL. But the funny part is, if you do the same improvement in Postgres, it's a complete disaster. The query performs 10, 20 times slower. The same query, which takes I think 10 to 15 seconds, wasn't even finishing after 10 minutes. I just had to shut it down. So when I did just to get the query plan, not actually run it, it was doing a complete for every row in channels, it would go and search a linear scan for every row in post. So n multiplied by m of
that stuff right there. Looking at the explain and potentially getting insights out of where what is happening and interpreting and explain. That would be an area that I'd love to be able to ask you questions about.
Actually, I have, let me see, how much time do we have? We have a couple more minutes, 20, right? Yeah, so I actually did such a thing. Let me just go through it again. I think it'll be helpful. So here we go. I did this in a developers meeting. So yeah, probably a lot of you would not have attended. So it'll be good to go through it. So here is a particular improvement that I did with the SQL query, and I'll just go through the explain analysis of both SQL queries and go through okay, how do you look at the explain output and see what changed, and just in general get a bit more knowledge on that. So yeah, fair warning, this is like fairly deep dive into Postgres internals. Okay, just I'm like going through this slide deck after a long time. So yeah, I'm also like seeing this. I haven't mentally prepared what to say, but yeah. So just a brief 101 on what are database indexes. So let's say this is your posts table, and you want to search all posts with a given ID, right? Now, like usually what you would do is like, okay, you linearly search for, okay, if this is equal to ID ZZ, if this is equal to ZZ, or if this is equal to ZZ, and like do a linear scan, right? But what we can do is we can create an index, and this is exactly how the index in a book looks like. So we here, like you can, if you want to search for a given word, you look at the index, then the word maps to the page number, and then you can go to that given page, right? This is exactly how database indexes work. So, and the best part is this, yeah, sorry. Click and find out what's coming. Yeah, it's a map, and the best part is it's sorted, right? Which means that if like someone tells you to order the data, you can just go through the index because it is already ordered, right? Okay, so here this is the post table, and this is an index on the ID, right? So let's see, yeah, if we do the query now, okay, if we do the query now, it will, and because like this is sorted, right? Which means that you can actually do like a binary search on this rather than doing a sequential scan here. I hope this is clear, because this is the whole point of why is an index fast. Because when you write the index, you write it in a sorted fashion, and when you search it, you can do a binary search. Not exactly binary search, there are more complicated algorithms than that, but basically the time complexity goes from n to log of n, which is like a major improvement. So in this case, like if it's like ID equal to ZZ, we'll start from the back and immediately get ZZ, point to location 2, and just get the row. Okay, so here is the query. We don't need to take a look at the whole query. We just need to focus on this part, right? So this is the simplified representation of that query. So which is just, okay, select count post.id from post, where post.root ID equal to something, right? So basically we are counting all of the rows in the post table having a specific root ID value, right? Very simple. So here is the post table, and this is the index, and here we can, this is the index for the root ID, right? Every column can have separate indexes, and also you can have indexes for multi-columns. But this is the index for the root ID. Now, let's see. Yeah, so ZZ points to this row and this row. And we are counting the number of posts.id column, right? There is a difference here. Okay, so this part should be fairly clear. We are just using the root ID index here, and then this points back to the ID column, and then we are just counting the number of posts.id. So here is where the performance improvement was made. Initially, this was post.id, right? Now I change it to count star. So, okay. I must have said something at that point. I don't know what this is supposed to do, but overall, the idea is that, oh, now I remember. Yeah. So, sorry. Yeah, so here, when we are doing post.id, the query has post.id here, right? Which means that like after getting the index, it needs to, like, this location is 1, right? So it needs to go to this location and get the ID column and then actually do the count, right? Because we are counting the post.id column. We are not counting star. So that is a difference. So it searches for the index, and then it uses the pointer to point back to the actual table row and then count there, right? So this is still an index scan, but this is scanning the index and the main table as well, right? But here we are doing select count star, right? So there is no reference to anything other than just the root ID, right? So the index can just go through this root ID, the SQL query can just go through this index and just count number of items having value as ZZ, and that's it. It doesn't need to scan the table at all. So this is the difference between where is it? Yeah, index scan and index only scan. So with all of that said, now let's look at the query plan. So this was the original query plan of a select count post.id, right? So this was like the full query, but let's take a look at this one, right? Index scan using index post root ID deleted, right? So this is an index scan, which means it will take a look at the index and also look at the row which the index is pointing to. Now you can see the cost here, right? So the cost is a sort of like cost estimate which Postgres comes up with that how costly is this particular part of the query, right? So there are costs in different parts of the query, which boils down to this one, right? So 9.14 ... this one means, so this is the initial cost of just beginning to fetch the data, and then this is the final cost after you do all of the sorting and grouping and then returning all of the data. So this is the initial cost, this is the final cost, and this also shows the actual data. So this is just like a brief explanation of how to read the query plan output, but these are the two main points here. One is it is doing an index scan, and second is the cost, because this cost is the one where we will actually see improvements and then come to the conclusion whether we actually did an improvement or not, right? Because without that, it's like, okay, how do we know whether this is actually better or worse, right? So now you can see this is the new one with select count star. You can see that this is doing an index only scan, and look at the cost. So initially it was 4,300 something. Now it's 56, right? So yeah, we can see that clearly it has improved. And yeah, that's it. So
quick question.
Yeah.
What's so that index?
Mhm.
Can you show there were two different indexes? There's the post root ID.
The index is the same. See, post root ID deleted, post root ID deleted. The index is the same, but since the query changed from select count post.id to select count star, you no longer need to look at the original table row any longer. You can just serve the SQL query by just looking at the index. So this is an index only scan. Whereas previously this was an index scan, which means that it would look at the index and then use the pointer from the index to the row in the table to then do something on that row, right? Because we were counting select count posts.id from post and something, it needed to look at the post.id to actually conclude the information which we are requesting, right? But here, since we are doing select count star, it knows that, oh, I just need to count the number of rows satisfying this. And that index, since it's the index on root ID, so it has the root ID, and that's it. There are actually like, if you log into a Postgres console, you can run commands to look at a given index and analyze that, but yeah, that's out of scope. And this is just like a brief overview of like, oh, okay, like if you have to explain, analyze outputs, how do you look at them, what you see. Yeah. By the way,
So-
this is just Postgres. I'm not going to talk about MySQL.
No one likes MySQL.
Yeah, apparently we won't be talking much about it much anymore. Looking at both of these query plans, it's not immediately obvious, or maybe it isn't to me, that I mean I still see index scans and aggregates and subplans and conditions.
Yeah. So
And-
this is like the explain for all this entire thing, right? And we are just optimizing this part. So
Right. But what I'm saying is
Mhm.
nothing in there. I mean, since it's still using the same index scan
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
the aggregate, it's just what was the aha moment where you said, oh, let me do count star instead of count posts.id? Because nothing in here
Yeah.
tells me that is like there's no red flag that says, hey, you need to stop doing that, count on something else.
Yeah.
Or is that kind of
this is just
tribal?
like this is just like, what can I say, domain knowledge, years of
Mhm.
understanding Postgres and the application.
Ah,
And like,
okay.
yeah, I mean, I don't remember exactly how I found this, but yeah, so like I looked at this and I saw that this is doing an index scan. I'll tell you what my thinking. Okay, so I looked at this. I thought that this is doing an index scan, and then I took a look at the query and then realized that you actually do not need to do an index scan because because the ID column of a post table will always exist, right? Because that's the primary key. So there is no need to do post.id. We can just do select count star. And yeah, then I saw that, oh, that's doing an index only scan. So yeah, I mean, like there is no other way rather than just like, okay, go through the Postgres documentation over and over, just like internalize all of those concepts, and then you can.
Okay.
This is awesome context, or this is exactly the area I was sort of thinking of. Can you bring that back up, actually?
Okay. We were kind of over time, so.
Are we? Oh, according
Oh
to
yeah.
yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Sorry, one quick one, I hope.
Mhm.
Just at a high level.
Mhm.
It seems that, sometimes when we ask for an explain analyze and we relay it back, the team will notice, oh, hey, why isn't it using an index here?
Mhm.
Almost as if to say, when we do it, it uses an index.
Right.
And
Right.
so I guess there's some magic under the hood, obviously, lots of magic, but
Mhm.
I think it's understanding how to spot when, I guess you need to know the product and the database really deeply, but understanding how to spot those things, like what's going on at a high level, like
Yeah. So right. So if you see something not using an index, then how will you know that whether it should use the index or
Right.
not? Right. So that
Right.
means you need to go to the database, look at the schema, then see whether there is an index or not. Right. If there is, then you know that okay. Why is it not using the index? So usually for Postgres installations, what I have seen is that if you run vacuum analyze the table name, it just Postgres just starts to use the correct index again. So an example that I have is like, okay, this guy, Alexander Greiser, most probably all of you know. So he was there was this analytics query, similar. I think it was like select count star from post or something like that. There was this analytics query which was suddenly taking like, okay, 30 seconds for him. And then I asked him to, okay, let's take a look at the explain output. And that was doing a sequential scan, not doing an index scan. So I started with like, okay, this is your answer to like, okay, starting from first principles, right? So first thing I did like, okay, this is a query that is not taking an index. So what do? First, I asked him to like, okay, let's do an analyze. We did the analyze, and then we saw it suddenly improve. We didn't actually take a look at the explain output. We are just looking at the query time, and it suddenly improved. And then I thought that, oh, okay, problem solved. And then again, after some time, again, it regressed. So then I thought that, oh, wait, this wasn't actually solved. After querying for the first time, Postgres inserted all of it into the buffer cache. And so that's why the second and third query entirely returned from the cache, right? So that's why it returned faster. So how do we know that? There is an extra flag as part, where is this? Okay, anyway, so explain analyze, there is an extra flag, explain analyze buffers equal to true, which will show you how many buffers were hit. So I asked him, hey, can you run this? Which showed that, okay, this entire query just returned from the buffer, right? So next step, I asked him, can you do a vacuum analyze? He did that. Then I asked him, hey, don't run the query, show me the explain output. Then when he showed the explain output, we could see that now it is doing an index scan and that even after several hours, the query was running correctly. So just another example of okay, how do you approach things from first principles, take a look at things at step by step. But you will need to know that, okay, if something immediately returns the second time, that means you need to understand that Postgres has this concept of buffer cache, and it also uses the OS cache. And you need to know that you can add this buffers equal to true in the explain output to get all of this info. So there's just this, more and more knowledge that you will gather as and when you get more and more deeper into it.
Thanks, Agniva.